Well, if you've been following the continuing saga of the bad news in journalism these days, you've been reading about what happened to the Boston Phoenix, which is one of the great alternative newspapers in our country. And Dan Kennedy first came to my attention as their media critic. I thought he was an absolute must-read. When I was living in California, I said to myself, there are two things I have to read, the Globe Sports section and Dan Kennedy. We got back, we got him to Northeastern, but it turns out that his research is very much in the line of this kind of unfortunate story, because while everybody else is lamenting what's happened to journalism on the downside, Dan's a guy with a flashlight in a tunnel. He's been looking around trying to find some good news, and he actually has. He has a new book coming out on a online newspaper in New Haven, and his next work will have to do with some very interesting ideas of news cooperatives. So I give you our colleague, Dan Kennedy.
Thank you very much for that. As Steve said, last week we lost the Boston Phoenix, and this was one of the great pantheons of the alternative press. I mean, this would be almost akin to losing the Village Voice, and I spent 14 years there, and it's been really sad to see and also kind of heartening to see the outpouring among Boston Phoenix alumni who are scattered throughout the land. But it really underscores the problem that we're in right now, which is that we are trying so hard to find ways to pay for journalism. The subject of my book, The Wired City, which is coming out in late May, is very much involved with how do we pay for journalism. The New Haven Independent is a nonprofit, online-only news site. That is one way that it works. Journalism is what economists call a public good, and that means something similar to how we might mean it informally, but it has a more specific meaning to it. And by a public good, it means it benefits everyone whether they pay for it or not. An example of this might be a newspaper that exposes corruption in City Hall. Everyone benefits from that, whether they're reading the paper or not, or whether they even know that it's going on. In a post-advertising media environment, and unfortunately we are in a post-advertising environment, who will pay is paramount. Nonprofit funding pays for journalism that isn't necessarily advertiser-friendly. In New Haven, the Independent is a nonprofit success story. It fills a niche in covering the neighborhoods, local politics, in a way that the traditional media in New Haven can't do. In Hartford, the Connecticut Mirror, a larger nonprofit, has the resources to cover state government. The only news organization in Connecticut that has a reporter in Washington right now is the Connecticut Mirror, not any of the big dailies, not a television station. In San Diego, the Voice of San Diego is a reliable alternative to the very shaky Metropolitan Daily. Now, there are limits to the nonprofit model, as I found out. For one thing, foundations tend to give money for just a few years, and then they expect you to become self-sustaining. And this is a very difficult challenge because this problem of how to pay for journalism continues past the first 2 or 3 years. The New Haven Independent has been very fortunate to get a fair amount of local support, but nevertheless it's a big ongoing challenge. The IRS has put a halt to approving nonprofit status for news sites. Journalism is not one of the activities that was envisioned as a nonprofit activity. And maybe 6 or 7 years ago, the IRS approved a few of these, including the New Haven Independent. And then they said, wait a minute, all of a sudden we're getting blizzarded with applications, so we're going to put a halt to this and think about it. This is the logo of the Chicago News Cooperative, which went under because the IRS never got around to acting on their application. And then finally, nonprofit news does not enjoy the full protection of the First Amendment. Nonprofit news organizations cannot endorse political candidates. This goes back to an amendment that Lyndon Johnson slipped through in 1954 when he was running for re-election to the Senate, and there were a couple of nonprofits back home who were just hammering him. So this did not spring from the quill pens of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. It's a very recent and more dubious development. So we come to the idea of the news co-op. I only know of one. It's in Hawaii. But Tom Stites, who's a veteran journalist, New York Times experience, Chicago Tribune experience, has been working on this idea called the Banyan Project that would basically be a co-op in a box, software and a business plan that any community could get up and running with a news co-op. The idea is that members would give money and or labor. You might be a blogger for your neighborhood, and that would get you membership in the co-op. This is the Brattleboro Food Co-op. It's the closest thing I could think of to illustrate this idea. And Banyan is launching a pilot sometime later this year to be called Haverhill Matters. Haverhill, as a lot of you probably know, is a blue-collar city, about 60,000 people north of Boston. They've gone from 2 daily papers in the 1960s, 1950s and 60s, to no local presence today. They do have a big daily paper that covers them, the Eagle Tribune, but they're not located in Haverhill, and there's no newspaper that has an office in Haverhill. So Haverhill Matters will empower the community to tell its own story. Now, I'll tell you, the New Haven Independent was a project that excited me. I thought it would really work well. It has worked well. I am dubious about this. So what am I taking a look at? Will enough people join Haverhill Matters to make it viable? And they're projecting that they need 1,200 members paying $36 a year for a $43,000 budget to be supplemented with some grant money, some advertising. If they can't get that, they can't make it work. Can citizen journalists be harnessed to provide coverage on which self-government depends? We're 10 years into rhetoric about citizen journalism. It's met with very, very limited success under very controlled conditions. So again, I'm skeptical about this, but it seems to be worth watching. And then finally, if the Banyan model succeeds in Haverhill, can it be replicated in other news deserts, as Tom Stites likes to refer to these underserved communities? So I know I'm a couple minutes over, but thank you for your attention.